The termination letter was still warm from the printer when Jonah Mercer felt his world cave in. Snow pressed softly against the glass walls of the office behind him, Christmas lights blinking across the city skyline, mocking him with their cheer. It was Christmas Eve, and the security badge in his trembling hand had already stopped working. One moment he had a job, a routine, a fragile sense of stability. The next, he was a single father standing in a corporate hallway with a cardboard box, a child's crayon drawing peeking out from the top, and a future that suddenly felt terrifyingly empty. If you believe kindness deserves second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heartline Tales. Stories like this remind us that humanity still matters. Jonah had learned long ago how to hold himself together when life tried to break him. Since the night his wife passed away unexpectedly 3 winters ago, leaving him alone with their daughter, he had mastered the art of swallowing fear. He worked harder than anyone else in the logistics department, arriving early, leaving late, skipping lunches so he could leave on time to pick up 6-year-old Nora from school. Every decision he made was anchored to one simple goal: keep her safe, keep her smiling, keep their small world intact. That morning, he had tied her scarf with extra care, promising hot chocolate and Christmas music later, never imagining that by nightfall he wouldn't know how to pay for groceries, let alone presents. The office around him was eerily quiet, most employees already gone home to families and celebrations. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jonah walked toward the elevator, Nora's small hand tucked into his coat pocket for warmth. She had been waiting in the lobby with her backpack and her unasked questions, sensing something was wrong, but trusting him enough not to press. He felt her glance up at him, her eyes searching his face for reassurance, and that almost broke him more than the firing itself. Inside the box he carried were fragments of a life built carefully, patiently. A framed photo of Nora on her first day of school, her grin missing 2 teeth. A tiny knitted snowman she'd made during an after-school program he could barely afford. Papers he'd once thought mattered, now reduced to clutter. Jonah had been told the termination was due to restructuring, budget cuts, a decision made above his manager's head. No warning, no severance, no mercy for timing. Just a polite apology and a nod toward the exit. Behind the glass wall of a nearby conference room stood the CEO, Marissa Caldwell, arms crossed tightly against her tailored blazer. She was known throughout the company for her sharp instincts and colder reputation. Results-driven, efficient, admired by shareholders, and feared by employees. She watched Jonah walk past with the box and the child, a flicker of irritation passing through her face. To her, it was another necessary cut, another line item balanced before year's end. Or so she thought. Jonah stepped out into the evening cold, the city breathing winter around them. Nora finally spoke, her voice small and careful, asking why they were leaving so early and whether they would still see the Christmas tree at home. Jonah smiled, a fragile thing, and nodded. He didn't trust his voice. He hailed a bus instead of calling a rideshare, counting the bills in his wallet, already doing math that didn't add up. As the bus pulled away, snow smearing the window like tears, Jonah let himself feel the weight he'd been holding back all day. He had failed, he told himself. Failed to protect the one person who depended on him. What Jonah didn't know was that upstairs, in the quiet glow of the executive floor, something had shifted. Marissa Caldwell hadn't been able to shake the image of the man and child walking out. It wasn't policy that haunted her. It was the drawing she'd glimpsed in the box, bright colors clashing against the dullness of the office. A child's drawing didn't belong in a layoff scene. It lingered in her mind long after the last board member left. Back in her office, as she prepared to leave for a charity gala she barely cared about, Marissa reviewed the termination list one final time. Jonah Mercer's name stood out, not because it was special, but because of a note attached from Human Resources about repeated schedule adjustment requests. She frowned, digging deeper into his file, something she rarely bothered to do. Performance reviews glowed with praise. No warnings. No misconduct. Just consistent excellence and an unusual number of personal accommodation notes. Curiosity, sharp and unwelcome, pushed her to scroll further. She found records of unpaid overtime declined, unused vacation days, and a request made months earlier for a temporary work-from-home arrangement after a medical emergency. Attached was a brief explanation, sole caregiver to minor child after spouse deceased. The room felt suddenly smaller. The polished wood desk, the city lights, the success she'd built brick by brick all seemed to lean inward. Marissa's own memories surfaced uninvited. A different Christmas Eve, years ago, when she was a child sitting alone in a hospital waiting room, her father working double shifts, her mother gone too soon. She remembered the silence, the way adults spoke around her instead of to her, the way money problems had felt like a storm she couldn't escape. She had sworn then she'd never be powerless again. Somewhere along the way, power had turned into distance. Down in their small apartment, Jonah and Nora decorated their modest tree with handmade ornaments. Jonah moved slowly, exhaustion heavy in his bones. He heated canned soup, stretching it with water, and told Nora stories to distract her from the thinness of dinner. She handed him the drawing from the box, the one she'd made of them holding hands under a star, and told him it was her favorite because it meant they were always together. Jonah held it like a lifeline. Near the end, before the final moments of this story unfold, if this journey is already touching you, please tap like and share it with someone who believes compassion still has a place in this world. Late that night, as Jonah sat at the kitchen table filling out job applications, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another automated rejection, but something made him answer. The call was brief and unreal, words tumbling over each other about a mistake, an urgent meeting, a request for him to come in first thing in the morning. Jonah didn't allow himself hope. He'd learned better. Still, he nodded and said yes. The next morning, the office looked different. Warmer, somehow. Jonah was ushered into a private room where Marissa Caldwell waited. No blazer, no armor, just a woman who hadn't slept. She told him everything, how the decision had been rushed, how she hadn't seen the human cost until it was too late. She admitted that she'd forgotten what it meant to be afraid of losing everything. Her voice broke when she spoke about his daughter, about the drawing, about Christmas Eve. Tears slid down her face, unpolished and real, as she apologized not as a CEO, but as a person who had failed. Jonah listened, stunned, emotions colliding inside him. He hadn't expected justice. He'd only expected survival. When she offered his job back, with flexibility, a raise, and support he'd never asked for, Jonah felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief alone, but validation. Someone had finally seen him, just before the ending. Please take a second to comment below and tell us where you're watching from or who this story reminded you of. Your words matter more than you know. That evening, Jonah walked home with Nora, snow crunching beneath their boots, the city glowing brighter than it had the night before. He carried no box this time, just groceries and a small wrapped gift he could finally afford. At home, they drank hot chocolate and laughed, the fear of the past 24 hours slowly dissolving into gratitude. Somewhere across the city, Marissa sat alone, staring at a child's drawing she'd asked Jonah to let her keep, a reminder pinned above her desk of the cost of forgetting compassion. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real, please like, comment, and subscribe to Heartline Tales. Stories like Jonah's exist everywhere, waiting for someone to notice. And sometimes, noticing changes everything.